Hi, my name is Dan Fazio, and I wanted to talk to you about some lessons learned for H2A users about the recent events up in Sumas. A grower in Sumas, Washington is currently struggling with labor unrest, and there are valuable lessons for all farmers who use the Legal Worker Program. I'll give you 5 pointers here, but if you want more in-depth information, please register for our webinar about this topic. To register for the webinar, go to our website. It's wafla.org, wafla.org, or send an email to our Member Relations Assistant, Evan Jaeger, at ejaeger, Jaeger, at wafla.org. Okay, first some background of the situation in Sumas. A worker was taken to the hospital late in the first week of August with a medical condition that was unrelated to employment. It's reported to be diabetes. In response, approximately 10% of the H2A foreign workers from the farm walked off the job but remained in employer-provided housing. In addition to the death of this young man, who was married and had a family, the workers were unhappy about work conditions and the food that was being served. The employer notified the workers that they needed to return to work, and when they refused, the workers were terminated and asked to leave the property. Well, from there, you probably know the rest. A left-wing feminist group who espouses food sovereignty and a local labor union are encouraging workers to remain in the U.S. without authorization in protest, and news media are swarming to the farm. Regulators from several agencies have initiated inspections, of course. What did Sarah Farms do wrong, and what lessons can you learn to avoid this for your operation? First, let me acknowledge the death of the worker. Whenever a worker dies, it's a tragedy, regardless of whether the death was work-related. In the coming days, Washington State Workers' Compensation System investigators will determine whether the worker's medical conditions were exacerbated by working conditions, and if so, the family may be entitled to a pension. Second, let me state that most of what Sarah did was correct from a human resources standpoint, and probably complies with the regulation. There's always pressure on regulators to find the employer when a worker dies, regardless of the reason, and therefore Sarah could face fines even if they did nothing wrong. With those preliminary remarks out of the way, what can we learn? Here are 5 pointers. Number 1, it's important to have policies. It's important to know your policies, and most of all, it is important to follow your policies. In this case, you should have a policy that requires workers to come to work, and another policy which permits workers to complain without fear of retaliation. So rule number 1, have policies, know them, and follow them. Right now, please review with your managers the policy when workers do not report to work. Okay, pointer number 2, communicate with workers promptly. In this case, a worker died, and a number of workers did not show up to work in protest. As soon as possible, you should have a team meeting to find out what's going on. If you work with Wafla, you could call us and we would send a trainer out to your farm. At your communication session with workers, review the policy. In this case, you would tell the workers that you will listen to grievances and there will be no retaliation, but they must come back to work. Many employers have policies which allow for termination if the worker misses 3 days without a valid excuse. So rule number 2 is this: communicate with your entire workforce promptly. Okay, number 3, put it in writing. Give workers a short statement of your policy. In this case, you would reiterate the grievance procedure and the policy for showing up to work. From the news stories I've seen, Sarah terminated the workers for, quote, insubordination, unquote, but did not give them a clear statement of what the insubordination was. There are numerous interpretations of what happened, and the workers are going to make up wild allegations. It's up to you to counter them with facts and concise statements. For example, our policy allows workers to file complaints, but requires workers to report to work while we are working through the complaints. Okay, so pointer number 3 is put it in writing, distribute copies of your policy to workers. Number 4, have a reserve of trust with workers and worker advocates that you can draw on. At Wafla, we have a good working relationship with the State Workforce Agent, or SWA for short. I personally inspected Sarah Bonan's operation with the Washington SWA a couple of years ago, and we pointed out issues to management. We also enjoy a good working relationship with the Mexican consulate. The consulate has a legal department whose mission is to protect the rights of Mexican nationalists. When there's trouble, you should immediately inform both the State Workforce Agent and the Mexican consulate and invite them to visit. My personal opinion is that employers should not attempt to use the H-2A without an association like Wafla or someone else who has these kinds of ties and who will support you in times of need. So rule number 4, cultivate your relationship with regulators and trustworthy worker advocates. Final point, communication with the news media. My preference here is to communicate in writing when news media call. Ask them how much time you have, ask them what the questions are, and send a short written communication. Avoid lengthy verbal explanations. Many companies have a crisis communications plan. If you don't, you may consider establishing one. So our final pointer is keep communications to the press brief and in writing. These 5 observations we have based on this situation. Of course, there are many more. To find out more, please register for the Wafla webinar about this topic. The webinar is free if you're using the Wafla H-2A program or if you have a season pass for our webinar series. And it's very inexpensive even if you don't. Send an email to Evan Jaeger, that's EJAEGER @wafla.org for details. And thanks for listening.